Originally, they were destined to become the 5 great scenes that would destroy the continent 10 years later. They had become the targets of the man's guidance and reform. However, he had yet to realize the seriousness of the situation. Returning to 2.5 years earlier, the man unexpectedly transmigrated to this fantasy continent. At that time, he knew absolutely nothing about this world. Because of that, he only wanted to survive by relying on his status as a count's son. But one day, from his personal maid, he unexpectedly learned the identities of his 2 older brothers. They were Leo Faladi and Tonio Faladi. The moment he heard that familiar surname, an intense sense of unease surged through him. Could this place actually be Cecilia? Cecilia was originally a turn-based role-playing game. No matter which storyline players chose at the start, once the 5 great scenes officially descended, all nobles and cities would face destruction. And the Faladi Count family, before the game's main storyline began, was merely a group of insignificant noble NPCs doomed from the start. The reason the man knew them so well was because this family was the first useless noble house wiped out by the protagonist's party. He still remembered how much experience points they provided. But he never imagined that he himself would become the youngest son of the Faladi family. He immediately cursed his terrible luck. At this moment, he was desperately praying to the goddess to send him back to his original world. After all, he only had 10 years of luxury left to enjoy here. Weren't transmigrators supposed to come with cheat abilities? Why didn't he get one? Just as he thought that, Alan suddenly stood up. In fact, his advantage had always been there. After all, he knew the future course of the game 10 years ahead. That was equivalent to possessing crucial future intelligence in order to survive peacefully until the end. He secretly formulated a plan. The core of the plan was to reform the 5 great scenes. After all, they were still children who had likely not awakened yet. As for himself, 2.5 months passed in the blink of an eye. Alan's assistant was reporting the progress made during this period. He had rescued all the orphans from the Eastern Living Experiment Laboratory. He had also handed management over to you. Alan nodded in satisfaction. You did a great job. Hearing that, Evan froze for a moment. The young master was praising him, right? After all, the young master's face showed almost no emotional expression. Alan then forced out a smile. I'll be relying on you from now on. In truth, he had no choice. Expressions that should have been easy to make simply would not appear on his face. This was the first time Evan had been trusted so much. He awkwardly scratched the back of his head. Anyway, thank you for your recognition, young master. It should be known that Evan was one of the few people who remained loyal in a world where betrayal was commonplace. That was why, the moment Alan discovered him, he decisively hired him. Then Alan suddenly changed the topic. The one we rescued this time was the girl named Yudia, right? Evan immediately confirmed it. Everything was exactly as Alan had expected. Based on his years of mercenary experience, that girl was definitely not an ordinary child. Even Evan couldn't comprehend why someone like her would obediently remain locked inside a laboratory. But he had an even bigger question. Why didn't the young master bring her back and train her personally? However, Alan understood that question, although it seemed that he wasn't making use of her power at all, and had placed her elsewhere. This was actually part of his plan. Yuja Floja. This person possessed a monstrous bloodline that had formed a contract with another world. She was a sin of wrath among the 5 great sins. She was a monster responsible for hundreds of thousands of casualties. But if she could grow up in peace, she might not walk the path of destruction. Alan couldn't help praising himself. To stop Evan from he needed an explanation. The reason was simple. The time had not yet come. Hearing that, Evan couldn't help frowning. He felt that his young master was planning something enormous. Alan then instructed Evan not to reveal the matter. He also provided sufficient financial support. Finally, he asked him to deliver this comforting letter to Yudia. After enduring such cruel human experiments, she needed proper comfort and reassurance. Although Alan wasn't sure whether the letter would truly calm her, he still had to give it a try. Therefore, he added a special passage to the letter. This phrase had been mentioned dozens of times in the game. It was originally a spell used to soothe the blood race. It possessed a calming effect. The worries of creatures of darkness and the aspirations of creatures of light share but one destination and one longing. This was a scene from the Wrath storyline. Back then, reciting this spell had no effect at all. However, that was during a post-defeat battle sequence. Now, however, it was still 10 years before the game's war began. Nothing was too late yet. One of them had already been dealt with. It was time to move on to the next. Meanwhile, on Yudia's side, she was carefully reading Alan's letter. Evan increasingly found the girl strange. She seemed like a puppet without emotions. Just then, Yudia spoke up. The person who wrote this letter. Is he Lord Alan? Why didn't he ask me to stay by his side? The aura emanating from Yudia's body caused cold sweat to break out on Evan's back. After all, for magical power to manifest physically, one normally had to reach the Master Realm. How could a girl, not even 10 years old, possibly achieve such a feat? The young master said that the time has not yet come. Hearing those words, Yudia finally calmed down. She then hugged the letter tightly against her chest. A blissful smile spread across her face, because to her, those words were a promise shared only between her and her master. She finally understood why her master had not kept her by his side. It turned out that the time had simply not arrived yet. By now, Yudia had already awakened her powers and become the young vampire who embodied the sin of wrath. Not long afterward, while Alan was investigating clues about the third great sin, Evan suddenly arrived with news that the second child had been successfully rescued. At once, Alan asked whether the child had been treated kindly. Just then, the study door was kicked open with a loud bang. The intruder was Tonio, the second son of the Count's family. He looked down at Alan arrogantly. Isn't this my useless little brother? I heard you've been obsessed with studying lately. Does trash like you even deserve to read books? Why aren't you answering when your brother is speaking to you? Alan couldn't help sighing at the original owner's situation, although he was furious. He had no choice but to suppress his anger. Then, Alan respectfully lowered his head, indicating that the other party could do as he pleased. Just as Tonio thought he had everything under control, a dagger suddenly flashed past his face. The blade embedded itself deeply into the wall. What are a bunch of insects making noise about here? Get lost. I don't want blood on my hands first thing in the morning. The newcomer was none other than Leo Falati, the eldest son of the Count's family. Alan quietly slipped away while his two brothers argued. In the game, the Falati family possessed considerable influence. However, they ultimately became the first cannon fodder to be eliminated. As for these two bickering brothers, one was destined to become the underground world's most notorious playboy kingpin, while the other would control the black market drug trade to continue surviving quietly for now. Alan decided to keep up his useless young master persona. After returning to his room, Alan reflected that the second child was also far from ordinary. What puzzled him most, however, was how a young master, who could barely protect himself, had known about that distant laboratory. Evan continued questioning him. This time, are We also placing the child in the orphanage. What Alan didn't know was that the unusual child he mentioned would become a terrifying existence, capable of destroying heaven and earth. Within the United Kingdoms, in the central kingdom of Kalia, the second future boss he had bought back from the slave black market was Deus. Back then, he had been sold repeatedly as a slave, suffering endless abuse. After passing through countless owners, he ultimately fell completely into darkness. He became the sin of Sloth. Among the 5 great scenes, he once massacred several kingdoms. Using extraordinarily cruel methods, many players would tremble in fear just from hearing his name. Interestingly enough, although he carried the title of Sloth, he was someone who always repaid both kindness and grudges. That was precisely why Alan repeatedly instructed Evan to treat him well. Afterward, Alan feigned calmness and told him to follow the usual procedure. The time still hasn't come. The letter Alan sent to the child this time appeared to be a warm greeting on the surface. Yet secretly, Alan had added some of his own heartfelt words. At the orphanage, a boy covered in scars stood out noticeably as he sat alone in a daze. A voice suddenly echoed beside his ear. "You've already been corrupted. The marks on your body are all his handiwork, aren't they? But you're fortunate enough. The Great Moon has chosen you to become an apostle. Come with me and embrace this bestowed power, awaken it completely. Offer up all your loyalty, following that Great One's footsteps, and you'll be able to make your enemies pay a terrible price. For now, go and deliver a special greeting to those people." Meanwhile, while Alan was still wondering where the third future boss was hiding, Evan rushed in with alarming news. "This is bad, young master. Second young master, Tonio, is dead. At Tonio's funeral, the Count held 2 beauties in his arms, while constantly complaining. He kept muttering, 'What a boring funeral. When is this finally going to end?'" Alan was dumbfounded. Someone was actually indulging himself at his own son's funeral. The setting of this dark fantasy game was just as outrageous as ever. What surprised him even more was that Tonio had died so early, apparently from an accidental fall that didn't match his original fate in the game at all. Night gradually deepened, and it was undoubtedly a beautiful and peaceful night. That night, in the land of drugs, a bald man named Marco couldn't help but sigh. The eldest young master of the Falati family is truly generous. The rewards he gives are always extremely generous. Thanks to those funds, their organization expanded rapidly. But when the 2 returned to their base, they were instantly horrified. Corpses were everywhere they looked. Even stranger, the victims had killed themselves, stabbing their own bodies with daggers. Yet they kept screaming for help. No matter how desperately they struggled, they could not escape death in the end. Just then, a figure in a black robe stepped out from a dark alley. Today's puppet show was truly a marvelous performance. It seems the sponsorship list will have to grow again. However, Deus couldn't understand what the point of all this was. What good would killing these insignificant pieces of trash do? How would it help with revenge? Yudia patiently explained. Everything we're doing now is laying the foundation for that person's return. when our Lord finally arrives, we can't possibly receive him. In a place as miserable as this, everything we do follows our Lord's will, and our Blue Moon organization is his sharpest blade. After the two left, a moon-shaped emblem remained on the ground. Ever since Alan and Aldia became pen pals, 2 years had passed without him realizing it. At this moment, Alan was anxiously searching for Evan. After wandering around for a while, he finally found him behind the estate. Evan was utterly exhausted. He had just delivered the 5th child to the orphanage. During this period, 3 incarnations of sin had appeared. Although locating the 3rd one, the sin of greed, had been difficult, Evan had ultimately managed to accomplish everything. Looking at Evan, who had spent an entire year running around, Alan immediately told him to take a break. This left Evan thoroughly confused. He wanted to confirm something. Young Master, does this mean our mission is finally over? The moment Alan gave an affirmative answer, Evan collapsed onto the ground with a thud. Then he let out a long breath he had been holding in. But young Master, why don't you seem very happy? Alan raised his chin. Take a closer look. Can't you see that I'm already smiling? Evan was completely bewildered. But honestly, he couldn't argue with that. Alright, I'll just assume that's a smile. Alan stretched lazily. He tried to organize his thoughts. He had never expected things to go so smoothly. The 5 great scenes all required special catalysts to take shape, even if he tried his hardest to rescue them. It would have been difficult to save them before tragedy struck. In other words, his greatest concern had been rescuing children already broken in body and mind. But now, that worry seemed unnecessary. All 5 rescued children were growing up healthily. Alan then asked about the orphanage. The last time you inspected the orphanage, you didn't notice anything unusual, right? Evan immediately took out a letter from you. Like Snowwolf when he was first rescued, he was practically no different from a broken doll. But he adapted extremely well to the orphanage. And that child, Lena, was the same. Back then, she kept her eyes shut all the time. She swore she never wanted to see this world again. Yet when I visited her last time, she was absorbed in reading books. Her personality had become far brighter than before. Alan admitted he hadn't expected Aldia to do so much. Maybe it was because she truly loved the orphanage. Thinking about it that way, Aldia was actually a pretty good kid. Evan looked puzzled and asked why. Did she write something special in her letters? He checked them repeatedly, but couldn't find anything unusual. Instead, he felt proud of the children's growth. I never thought they'd grow up this well. Environment really is the key. At that moment, Evan suddenly asked, when do you plan to meet them, young master? You always say you'll wait until the time is right. Alan didn't know how to explain it properly. Deep down, he simply didn't want to meet them. Although befriending them had many benefits, their future transformations into scenes were too terrifying. Based on his memories of the game, their personalities had already become distorted from childhood. Perhaps his intervention could improve things. But he still felt reluctant to get involved. So Alan casually brushed the question aside. Maybe in 5 years. Hard to say. In this dark world, surviving comes first. Having enough power to protect yourself is what truly matters. Fortunately, he still possessed some magical talent, while Alan was lost in thought. Evan suddenly mentioned a group called Blue Moon. It was a newly rising organization in the East, specializing in hunting down criminal gangs. It was Alan's first time hearing that name. Still, it sounded like they were doing something worthwhile. Since it wasn't in the game, it probably wouldn't last long. At that moment, Evan made a throat-slitting gesture. The important thing is, they even dare to kill nobles. Evan had assumed. The young master already knew about it. But after hearing that, Alan's legs went weak and he dropped to his knees. Afterward, he ordered Evan to sleep in the room next to his from that night onward. The scene then shifted to the orphanage. Aldia was listening to Blue Moon's weekly report. The sin of pride, Zulang spoke with bloodthirsty excitement. I twisted off all the traffickers' heads. I even gave them a chance to live. If they could correctly answer the color of my eyes. But not a single idiot got it right. The sin of greed, Lena, was even harsher. She melted their corpses completely. The southern operation has been fully wrapped up. Deus destroyed an illegal human experimentation laboratory, and Raiden, the sin of wrath, wasn't idle either. After listening to the reports from her subordinates, Aldia revealed a satisfied expression. We exist for the sake of the Great Moon. The Blue Moon was founded by Aldia herself. It was a mysterious organization that worshipped the moon. At that moment, Dia spoke up with a report. It seems we've run into a troublesome issue. Isn't the leader of Avalon that noble lord? The eldest son of the Count living in the estate. While handling the matter, Deus discovered that the eldest son seemed to have set his sights on that lord. What did you just say? Aldia was shocked. The surrounding air seemed to freeze instantly. Snowwolf had been smiling brightly just moments ago, but immediately became alert. He looked around cautiously. Lena, who had been observing from the shadows, suddenly narrowed her eyes and stared in a certain direction. Aldia read the secret message to the end. Sure enough, it contained an order to eliminate Alan. She clenched the letter tightly, her knuckles turning white. Aldia would never allow such a thing to happen. 2 years later, Count Faladi suddenly passed away. Officially, it was announced as a heart attack. But those who knew the truth understood it was caused by a drug overdose. Yet the eldest son, Leo, showed no emotion whatsoever. It was as though he had expected his father's death all along. Compared to that, he was more concerned about Blue Moon's movements. Thus, the news of the Count's death spread quietly. Not a single voice of mourning was heard. Back in his room, Evan hurriedly discussed countermeasures with Alan. After all, Leo would inherit the family next year. But Alan had already packed his luggage. He planned to leave and lie low for a while. His destination was the small village of Rodmi, south of Faladi territory. Leo stood upstairs, staring fixedly at his departing figure. How should I get rid of Alan? Although that foolish younger brother had no remarkable abilities, Alan had only enjoyed 3 carefree days in Rodmi before he was urgently summoned back to the Faladi estate. The reason was that Leo, the eldest son of the Faladi family, had suddenly died. Alan was completely baffled. He couldn't understand why Leo had died so unexpectedly. Moreover, the manner of death was entirely different from the game storyline. He had been killed by an arrow that pierced his heart with perfect precision. Who exactly killed Leo? Meanwhile, Alan noticed something strange. The servants working in the fields looked at him oddly. Their expressions were as if they were looking at a terrifying monster, yet he hadn't done anything outrageous. Soon, Evan returned from his investigation. Alan immediately asked if he had found any clues. But Evan looked shocked. He leaned close and whispered into Alan's ear. Young master, they believe you're the Mastermind who destroyed Avalon overnight. Alan was stunned on the spot. What on earth is going on with this plot? 3 days earlier, on the day Alan left the estate, Evan was deeply puzzled. He couldn't understand why. If Alan wanted to escape the family's control, he didn't hide in a prosperous city. In response to that question, Alan immediately denied the idea, because that place was never part of his plan, in his calculations. Rodney was the final destination of everything. After all, Alan had already pulled the 5 scenes out of the abyss of misfortune. The storyline that was once destined for destruction had already been completely altered. More importantly, Rodney was a blank area in the game world, with no plot relevance whatsoever. Besides, the Falati family had an unused house there. It was practically the perfect place to relax and live peacefully. Seeing Evan's confusion, Alan merely said he had his reasons. Evan immediately understood. The young master was clearly dodging the question he couldn't figure out. What grand scheme Alan was hiding? What Alan didn't know was that every move he made after leaving the estate was being watched by Leo. Leo's original plan was ruthless. He intended to poison Alan after their father died. Unexpectedly, Alan volunteered to leave for the border, saving Leo a lot of trouble. Leo had originally planned to spare him, but the recent chaos surrounding Avalon made him increasingly suspicious of Alan. After thinking it over, Leo ordered Armin, his trusted subordinate, to follow Alan's carriage. Upon receiving the order, Armand suddenly asked, "Should I eliminate him?" The unexpected question instantly broke the silence in the room. The atmosphere became strange. Leo frowned immediately. Armand had always obeyed him without question. This unusual behavior displeased him greatly. Just as he was about to reprimand him, an accident occurred in the next second. A cold blade suddenly pierced through his chest without warning. Leo was completely stunned. He never imagined that his most trusted subordinate would betray him. And the man before him was not Armand at all. His true identity was Shadan of Blue Moon. The organization's creed was simple and extreme: to become the sharpest blade of that lord. Anyone who dared harm that lord would be eliminated by Blue Moon members. For the sake of this fatal strike, Shadan had infiltrated Leo's side for a full 2 years. Looking at the fallen Leo, Shadan coldly declared, "Unfortunately, Blue Moon already gave you a chance, even at death's door." Leo still hoped his organization would avenge him. What a foolish dream. He had no idea that his entire power base had already been uprooted by Blue Moon. Meanwhile, Alan was living a heavenly life in Rod, a life of absolute comfort. His daily routine consisted of eating his fill and lazing around. After lazing around enough, he would get up and his days were carefree and comfortable, living however he pleased. Was, in Alan's view, the proper way for a noble to enjoy life. But this comfortable lifestyle had barely begun, when, after only 3 days, his peaceful life was completely disrupted. The reason was simple. Alan had to return and take charge of the situation. The entire family was thrown into chaos. Everyone began wildly speculating about what had really happened, and in everyone's theories, Alan was portrayed as a ruthless killer. Alan stood there helplessly, wondering who could tell him how things had ended up this way. After thinking it over carefully, Evan felt that their suspicions were not entirely unreasonable. After all, when everything was considered, the greatest beneficiary was clearly his young master, Alan. After all, they had only just left the estate, and Leo was assassinated shortly afterward. The timing was simply too coincidental. As a result, Alan became the only legal heir, with a perfect alibi. Even more coincidentally, the Avalon organization connected to Leo also vanished overnight. All leads were cut off. Taking everything into account, no one would come after Alan over Leo's death in everyone's eyes. Alan's move was nothing short of legendary. He was seen as both a sword saint and an assassin. He was even given the title of the true mastermind behind the Count's family. It was as if he carried a villain's aura. But only Alan himself knew that he had no way to defend himself. Even jumping into the Yellow River wouldn't clear his name, although he had done absolutely nothing, and had merely been an innocent bystander. Everyone still pointed their fingers at him. Just as Alan was feeling overwhelmed, he suddenly remembered the Blue Moon organization that Evan had mentioned before. Could Leo's death have been the work of this mysterious organization? He immediately asked Evan for confirmation. However, Evan directly rejected the theory and presented key evidence from the investigation. Based on the clues currently gathered by the guild, this incident was definitely not the work of Blue Moon. Blue Moon had a distinctive style. They never left bodies behind, but they always left a mark. Judging from the crime scene, all the Avalon members had been killed by a sword. Their wounds were unusual. Combining all the evidence, the killer was most likely a top-tier expert at the Sword Saint level. After thinking it through, Alan agreed. In the game storyline he knew, the suddenly emerging Blue Moon organization had never appeared before. It indeed seemed unlikely that they possessed such power. That raised the question, who was pulling the strings behind all this and causing such a massive upheaval? Meanwhile, Aldia was seriously questioning his subordinates about whether the operation had left behind any traces. Lena was the first to report, confidently stating that not a single clue had been left behind. She added that even the footprints at the scene had been cleaned up completely. No one would ever be able to trace them. As for Avalon's remaining forces, 486 of them had already been eliminated by Deus. Without exception, the rest who escaped were cleanly cut in half by Layden. After hearing the reports, Aldia smiled. His tone was filled with satisfaction. Excellent, perfect. The once all-powerful Avalon organization had been reduced to dust in just 5 days. Just as everyone thought, the mission had ended successfully. Layden spoke up again, raising an objection. His expression turned serious. He stated that, in his opinion, the cleanup operation was not yet perfect. Those words immediately changed Aldia's expression. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Layden then produced the document and pointed out the key issue. The file recorded several nobles who had close ties with Avalon. Among them, the Aldia family was considered the most suspicious. Aldia quickly reviewed the file. His gaze grew colder. In a low voice, he asked Layden, "You know what I want you to do next, don't you?" His tone allowed no room for disagreement. Hearing those words, everyone present immediately tensed up. They prepared for the next operation. Layden slightly bowed his head and replied firmly, "I understand your intentions. Please rest assured. I will eliminate that family completely." Using the most discreet method possible. Only then did Aldia finally relax. Now the only thing left was dealing with the guild situation. After a thorough investigation, they concluded that the incident had absolutely nothing to do with Blue Moon. For once, all the guilds reached the same conclusion. They all claimed that a Sword Saint had created this hellish massacre. Yet, Aldia did not dare lower his guard even slightly. He had to keep a close eye on every move the guilds made. We are nothing more than dust beneath his feet. We are not even qualified to have our own thoughts. Acting on our own without orders is absolutely unacceptable. Do you understand that clearly now? Our existence is that of machines that operate solely on orders. As long as the Lord has not spoken, no one is allowed to act recklessly or cross the line. Never let him be disappointed in us. Deus licked his dry lips with a stiff tongue. His gaze pierced straight into Udia's icy eyes. He truly could not understand this way of thinking. Someone as overwhelmingly powerful as Udia was actually trembling with anxiety out of fear of being discovered by that person. Things had reached the point where everyone was on edge. Deus was filled with doubts, yet he did not dare ask another question. After all, everything was for the Grey Moon, and more importantly, for that unfathomable Lord. Meanwhile, after Leo's funeral concluded, Alan found himself completely overwhelmed by family affairs. For an entire month, he had been so busy that he barely had time to rest. Deep down, all he wanted was to live a carefree and laid-back life. Although Leo had indeed offended many people while alive, according to the original storyline, he was supposed to die 6 years later. Because both brothers died in completely different ways, the entire plot of the game had been thrown into total chaos. All the miscellaneous responsibilities had landed on him, the sole heir. And to make matters worse, everyone in the household had become far more diligent than before, back when the Count was still alive. These people used to slack off every day. What Alan did not realize was that, in their eyes, the situation had become extremely delicate if they did not work with all their strength. They feared young Master Alan would remove them at any moment. Alan had already seen through their thoughts. It seemed that everyone was terrified of him. But Alan actually hoped they could solve things on their own. That way, he would not have to worry about everything himself. As night fell, Evan could not hide the shock on his face when he witnessed the unbelievable scene before him. In just 2 years, his young master had raised his magical abilities to the 2nd tier. Normally, achieving that level would require at least 4 years, along with exceptional magical talent. Although Alan practiced magic mainly for self-defense, truly mastering it was far from easy. The prerequisite was being able to control mana with millimeter-level precision. Although he had barely achieved that, his actual level was still that of a novice. In this fantasy world where magic flourished, he had once been so excited after learning magic that he could not even sleep. But as he studied further, he discovered a cruel truth. His magic core was unbelievably small. A person's innate magic core was like an athlete's natural talent compared with others. His core was ridiculously tiny. Just as he was lamenting his pitiful magic core, Evan's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. It turned out that they had received an invitation to a ball. If his 2 older brothers were still alive, he would never have attended. But now he was the Count of Aldia. His status was different. Some necessary social connections had to be maintained. This ball was being held in the southern region of the Kingdom of Estria. Its purpose was to provide nobles with a place to socialize. Therefore, Alan intended to use this opportunity to expand his network. After all, maintaining good relations with other nobles was very important for his relaxed lifestyle. However, reality soon dealt him a harsh slap in the face. The nobles present treated him as if he were some kind of plague. Even so, he had expected something like this. After all, the original Alan came from humble origins and lacked proper manners, although his family had once been a prestigious noble house for 3 generations. The Faladi family had long since fallen into disgrace. They were infamous for producing the most notorious troublemakers in the East. To put it more accurately, they were a group of unruly devils nobody dared provoke. Still, Alan had prepared carefully to change his image. He had even spent half a day practicing wine tasting. This wine truly has a unique flavor, especially that rich aroma. I absolutely love it. He was even considering taking a few bottles home. Combined with the gentle smile he had practiced for so long, he was certain everyone would find him approachable. Instead, a count's daughter broke into a cold sweat, turned around and ran away, shouting that she was going to report the matter to her father. The whole thing left Alan completely stunned. Why was this? Nothing like the scenario he had imagined. The surrounding nobles began whispering among themselves. They claimed he was 100 times worse than his 2 brothers. According to them, he had threatened others into giving him expensive wine. I am deeply sorry. I was being rude. I am the 3rd daughter of Duke Aldia's family, Loria of the Aldia family. That was the name she had just mentioned. You should know that this family is one of the 3 major powers operating behind the scenes. They are also known as the ruthless Northern Rogues. The person who took the initiative to approach him turned out to be someone so influential. Why do I not remember her at all from the game? I even suspected that she was not a character from the game at all. Before Alan could sort out his thoughts, Loria got straight to the point. Lord Alan, please lend me your strength, because I have a feeling that I may die here tonight. Alan clearly remembered that in the game's setting, the Aldia family only had 4 members. That meant she had already died before the story began. Loria was now explaining the hardships of her life to Alan. She was originally the child born to the Duke's most beloved wife, relying on her father's protection. She had barely managed to survive until now. However, Duke Aldia's life was now nearing its end. Once her father passed away, her half-sister would certainly try to kill her. Alan was completely puzzled. Why would she seek help from a complete stranger like him, given the power he supposedly possessed? Solving such a problem should have been effortless. For the first time, Loria's usually calm face showed genuine anxiety and fear. Alan immediately refused. Loria quickly added that she would not let Alan help her for free. If the plan succeeded, she was willing to offer half of her inheritance as payment. It was not that Alan truly did not want to help. The problem was that he could barely guarantee his own safety. It was better not to give her false hope. Even if Alan wanted to help, he was far from being one of those all-powerful nobles. When Alan turned back, he saw heartbreaking despair swirling in Loria's silent eyes. Alan could only sigh helplessly. He looked once again at Loria, who stood there motionless. Still, I sincerely wish you good luck. To ease the discomfort weighing on his chest, Alan forced out a polite blessing. To be honest, he genuinely hoped she would find reliable support. Meanwhile, all of Alan's actions were being closely monitored by Blue Moon. After hearing the conversation between Alan and Loria, Deus decided to report it to Aldia first. However, Lena signaled that there was no need to worry too much. That girl was the only member of the Aldia family who had not been placed on the elimination list. Deus immediately understood what she meant, if that was truly the case. Their future operations would be much easier. They only needed to focus on protecting that great person, while preventing any information about the Avalon incident from leaking out. When Alan returned to the reception hall after wandering around, a cold yet elegant voice called out to him again. Alan's heart immediately filled with excitement. Could he finally make a noble friend? But when he turned around and saw who it was, he froze on the spot. How could it be someone so important? As expected, those who took the initiative to approach him were never ordinary nobles. Alan then greeted the eldest daughter of the Genonia family with a flawless noble salute. Kalia looked slightly surprised and asked, "You know who I am?" Alan answered confidently, "Of course. You are famous in many circles. After all, she belonged to one of the three great powers of the Estria kingdom, the northern overlords, the Aldia family, the eastern rulers, the Falati family, and the Genonia family of the west. Miss Kalia, the eldest daughter of the Count. If the Falati family represented street thugs and rogues, then Genonia was a corporate-style dark empire. What Alan truly needed were connections that could guarantee him a peaceful life for the sake of a quiet future. He absolutely could not become too involved with such a dangerous woman. Still, Miss Kalia was undeniably stunning. At the same time, Deus and his companion noticed something unusual. A man dressed in black was secretly watching that great person. However, they had received no orders regarding him. A dozen days passed in the blink of an eye. Alan brought Evan deep into a remote canyon. We finally found this hidden location. In the game, it had been easy to locate, but in reality, it took more than half a month. The real reason Alan attended the ball was actually to search for this mysterious labyrinth. According to the game's lore, clearing the Whispering Labyrinth would reward the player with a precious divine artifact. Fortunately, Alan still clearly remembered the key strategy for conquering the labyrinth. At the deepest part of the canyon, a giant stone gate covered in mysterious ruins appeared before them. Evan also sensed that this place was extraordinary. But more than that, what amazed him most was how his young master knew about such a hidden location. "Because I often come here exploring." As soon as the words left his mouth, Alan realized he had almost exposed himself. He quickly tried to cover it up. "Of course, I was just joking. I naturally have my own special source of information." Above the puzzle mechanism hung a gigantic crushing device. If the answer was wrong, the massive structure would slam down and crush them to death. But what puzzled everyone was that the young master appeared unusually calm at this moment. Although he had served the young master for 4 whole years, he still could not figure out what the young master was truly thinking. Moreover, the young master knew the secrets of the distant hell like the back of his hand. The reason Evan was willing to follow this mysterious young master was because the young master always acted with justice and integrity, as Alan accurately solved a puzzle. The gate to the labyrinth's treasure slowly opened. Before them appeared countless dazzling treasures of gold and silver. However, Alan's eyes were fixed only on an ordinary-looking black ring, because he knew very well that coveting the other treasures would bring disaster. This ring of restraint was his true objective. The moment they stepped out of the labyrinth, Evan's expression suddenly changed drastically. Was this also within the young master's expectations? The instant they left the labyrinth entrance, dozens of magic golems blocked every possible path. Alan knew he was no match for these magical constructs, but he was already prepared to sacrifice himself to protect the young master. Seeing this, Alan merely smiled calmly. This time, leave it to me. He calmly walked toward the group of golems. Cold sweat poured down Evan's face. After all, the only second-tier magic the young master knew could never possibly destroy these steel giants. Before Evan could stop him, Alan had already begun chanting mysterious incantations. O fragment that inherited the great will of Nia, grant me the power of the laws of restraint. As the spell echoed through heaven and earth, the entire world instantly fell into stillness. A mysterious ethereal voice then sounded. Please state 2 executable restraint clauses. Even Alan himself was shocked by the magnificent scene. In the game settings, only a simple option window would normally appear here. The secret treasure, known as the Ring of Restraint, would impose limitations while simultaneously granting corresponding compensation. Alan took a deep breath and recited the restraint conditions he had prepared long ago. First condition: when casting magic, one must use the unique craftsmanship of Babylonia. What do you wish to obtain through this restriction? The power to slightly distort the laws of the world. The restraint accepted this request. Second condition: the user of magic must chant in the ancient language of Babylonia. What do you wish to gain from this? The same power I requested earlier. The mysterious holy voice fell silent briefly. Because of this repeated request, Alan immediately became nervous. Did I make a mistake in the procedure? Just in case, he had even deliberately copied the skill encyclopedia. Exactly. This place required overlapping dual restraints to maximize the power of magic. He had already cleared this stage countless times before, so logically, there should not have been any mistakes. A moment later, the ethereal voice spoke once again. I approve your contract request. Human who still remembers the ancient craftsmanship and the mysterious incantations long since lost. Thank you for inheriting this precious will. A new doubt arose in Alan's heart. What exactly did inheriting the will mean? At the same time, the ring of restraint gradually began to fade away. It seemed the contract had officially been established. Fortunate one who inherited the will. I shall always watch over your growth. The moment the voice faded, Alan's consciousness was pulled back into reality. Evan was desperately trying to drag him out of the golem's encirclement. Alan understood clearly that even if he exhausted all his mana, his lightning magic still could not surpass its existing upper limit. So he intended to use this opportunity to test what kind of heaven-defying power vows and sacrifices could bring. As the spell burst from between his teeth with a faint glow, blue electric arcs instantly surged and danced around him. Amid explosive thunder, the previously insignificant sphere of light suddenly erupted with blue radiance. In the blink of an eye, it split into hundreds of sharp rays. They rapidly combined into a gigantic sphere that covered the sky at this critical moment. Alan quickly formed hand seals with both hands, his thumb pressed tightly against the joint of his middle finger. The hand seal concealed a mysterious mechanism. Stone-like beams of sharp light shot out instantly. The final incantation rang out powerfully. The once ferocious group of golems within the canyon was instantly frozen in place like statues. Violent lightning tore through the air and mercilessly pierced through every golem's body. The dozens of steel monsters did not even have time to struggle. Before shattering into pieces across the ground, Evan, who had just been about to charge forward desperately with his weapon, was now completely dumbfounded. He stood frozen in place. This combat power is absolutely insane. Can this still even be considered human? Alan finally could not hold back anymore. He stepped forward and asked, "You weren't secretly hiding your strength all along, were you? This power is way too exaggerated." Alan merely shook his head gently and admitted that he had never hidden anything. Evan's eyes widened even further. This is really only second-tier magic. Facing his shock, Alan gave an affirmative reply. At this moment, Evan felt as though his entire worldview had been overturned. Although Alan appeared calm on the surface, his heart was already in complete turmoil. To be honest, even he himself had not expected this magic to unleash such terrifying power. After all, the turn-based combat system of hid an enormous secret. As long as hand seals and incantations were combined within a turn, the effects of magic could be strengthened layer by layer, just like this chain lightning spell. He had used 4 entire sets of incantations, along with reflected projectiles, reverse azurite wave patterns, and forcibly stacked the effects of 5 turns together. In simple terms, he had thoroughly mastered this unique system to create this overwhelming lightning display. However, due to his own limitations, he had to use hand gestures and incantations whenever casting any magic. After calculating it, the power of this spell had probably been amplified about 2-fold. Alan shrugged helplessly. Originally, he thought second-tier magic was nothing special, but this result had completely exceeded expectations. Even he himself was thoroughly shocked. Following the Peachtree Labyrinth, Alan had finally broken free completely. He collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. This whole experience was even more exhausting than personally fighting market-price monsters. He could not help but complain about this cursed place. At that moment, Alan suddenly remembered something. This labyrinth seemed to have a special name. Back when he searched guides in the gaming club, players all called it the Paran Labyrinth. It was said that a man named Paran had personally built this place as a beginner. Alan was completely confused by this. He had never heard that name before. Alan did not explain any further either. He only said they should leave this place first and discuss it later. Deep down, he understood clearly that matching craftsmanship with magical attributes could enhance power, and choosing the right spell could strengthen magical traits. Those were all game mechanics. But this place was completely different from the game. It was not just numbers increasing while forms stayed unchanged when he had just chanted the spell. The appearance of the magic visibly changed before his eyes. Could it be because his magical controllability was low enough for him to notice those details? Alan silently pondered this. Once his mana recovered, he would definitely test it thoroughly. And the impressive performance he had just displayed had all been witnessed by Lena. This made the already curious Lena feel that Alan was even more unfathomable. After Alan and Alma walked away, Lena immediately came to the previous battlefield. The mysterious text carved into the wall was no challenge to him at all. It was the ancient language of the Arnop Empire, from the forgotten era of the Outer Gods. The inscription read, "Coward, Paran. Carved us for a friend, destined for loneliness." Lena softly read the inscription aloud, then let out a mocking chuckle. During that dark era when chaos ran rampant, Paran had been a legendary existence. He had repelled the Black Tide countless times, and had even defeated Aurak, the terrifying being who only needed one glance to make believers willingly offer up their hearts. As a ring guardian born to inherit the ancient library and shoulder its mission, Lena recognized at a glance that the inscription on the doorway was written by Paran himself. So this labyrinth really had been built by that Paran. He muttered to himself softly. Suddenly, Alan's voice echoed inside his mind, startling him. Lena had long known that Alan was someone followed by Queen Udia, and definitely no ordinary person, but he had never expected that this man could even earn Paran's respect. What was even more unbelievable was that the seemingly ordinary spell from earlier actually concealed profound mysteries within its chant. It was definitely not a normal method. Countless thoughts clashed violently in his mind, leaving him utterly confused. As he kept thinking, Lena suddenly trembled all over, and sharply looked toward the direction Alan had left. On his face, an incomparably fervent look of reverence gradually appeared. Just at that moment, Lena sensed a faint hidden presence. He immediately turned his head. There stood Deus, who had appeared there at some unknown time. His violet golden eyes glimmered faintly. He slightly raised his hand toward Lena and said that the man in black was already dead. Lena's heart trembled. That man's head had actually been twisted off in midair by force. Yet, throughout the entire process, he had sensed no magical fluctuations. Such a method was terrifyingly bizarre. After hearing Deus's explanation, Lena fell into a brief silence. This matter had to be reported to Lady Aldia immediately. He made a prompt decision. After exchanging a few simple words, the two figures instantly blended into the night. They disappeared without a trace. The scene shifted. He'd arrived at the Genonia estate. Kalia was deep in thought alone. His mind was filled with the Alan he had met earlier that day. It seemed those rumors were all true. This man was not simple at all. His expression was so cold that it was unsettling, and his eyes were as unfathomable as an abyss. Although the Genonia family was famous far and wide, his father rarely participated in social affairs. Yet Alan had called out his father's name immediately. That was truly abnormal. Thinking of this, Kalia lightly snapped his fingers. The Count of Genonia beside him suddenly collapsed to the ground and lost consciousness immediately. It turned out the Count had long since been turned into a puppet by him. The entire family was already under his control. But how had Alan discovered the flaw? He could not figure it out no matter how much he thought about it. Even the guards he had hidden in the shadows had been accurately detected by Alan. At that moment, one of his subordinates hurried in. His face was full of panic. "Large Kalia, something has happened in your room. The situation is urgent." Kalia immediately rushed to his room. The moment he entered, he saw a shocking scene. The guard he had arranged there was lying stiffly dead inside the room. The guard's life-saving device had not activated, which meant he had died completely unprepared. Kalia instantly understood that his corpse had been deliberately placed here by someone. Not only was he not angry, he even revealed an interested smile. "How interesting. We only just met, and he'd already seized one of my biggest weaknesses." The doubts in Kalia's heart grew deeper and deeper. Yet all the schemes he had carefully planned were things Alan actually knew nothing about. The moment Loria stepped out of the ballroom, his hands suddenly clenched tightly. A self-mocking cold laugh escaped from his lips. Only then did he realize how naive he had been. The aura Alan displayed was definitely not something an ordinary noble young master could possess. Duke Aldia was treated as an honored guest by every major faction, a ruthless figure whom even faction leaders dared not provoke. Yet the gaze Alan cast toward him felt as cold and scrutinizing as his father's. Precisely because of that, at the very moment they first met, Loria desperately tried to seize that slim chance of survival. Unfortunately, all his efforts were still in vain. There were simply too few cards in his hand that he could play. At most, he could rely on the favors granted by his Duke father. Those fragile privileges could disappear at any moment. After all, there were still 4 blood-related siblings standing above him within the Aldia family. He was nothing more than a transparent figure who could be erased at any time. Loria knew better than anyone that if not for his father's lingering affection, then he would have long been eliminated by his brothers and sisters, just as he resigned himself to a tragic fate. The female doctor's urgent shout completely changed his doomed destiny. When the news broke that young masters Philin and Kig had suddenly lost their lives, he was utterly stunned. 2 of the 4 siblings who had tormented him for years had died. Such a thing was simply unbelievable. Before Loria could recover from the shock, A trembling scream came from upstairs. Young Master Million and Lady Mariana are dead too. Upon hearing this, Loria immediately rushed upstairs. After witnessing the unbelievable scene himself, he froze in place, unable to move. Who on earth could have done such a thing? Above the Aldia estate, a shadow darted away like a ghost. It was none other than Ridna, who had completed his cleanup mission. Loria had originally believed that those people would not tear each other apart so quickly. After all, there were still several heirs remaining. Yet now, all of his siblings had died at once. This situation made absolutely no sense. At that moment, Loria suddenly remembered Alan's farewell words. Still, I wish you good luck. So that man was the true mastermind behind everything. 2 months later, Alan unexpectedly received a letter from Count Aldia. This left him deeply puzzled. After all, he had never had any dealings with that family. However, when he opened the envelope, he found a bottle of red wine and a card inside. The wine came from Selnitz, one of the Empire's famous wine-producing regions. Only 3 bottles are produced each year. Its price alone reaches several thousand gold coins. He then specifically asked the butler who delivered the letter, "Was this really sent to me by Loria's instruction?" The butler answered with complete certainty. Furthermore, he emphasized that this was a wedding gift, personally selected by the new Countess. After hearing the butler's explanation, a look of astonishment appeared on Alan's face. In other words, in only 2 months, the third daughter of the Aldia ducal family, Loria, had actually ascended to the ducal seat. After the old Duke Aldia passed away, Loria naturally inherited the title. Thinking back to her previous situation, she had not even been qualified to enter that office. All of her brothers had died mysteriously. Only she remained completely unharmed, because she possessed a flawless alibi. When the incidents occurred, she was attending a ball. Moreover, before she even returned home, the forces she had cultivated had already been wiped out by her brothers. In other words, she had no capital whatsoever to oppose them. At this moment, Loria recalled everything that had happened. Cold sweat unconsciously ran down her back. So he had calculated even such details. Although Alan had outwardly rejected her request for help, he had secretly arranged everything flawlessly. What puzzled her the most was that, even after all the heirs of the ducal family were gone, he had never taken the initiative to contact her. After a long period of contemplation, she finally arrived at the only reasonable explanation. Alan was planning a much larger game. Although the Aldia family possessed considerable influence, it was insignificant compared to what he controlled, which meant he had another objective in mind. The Ferrari family relied solely on business operations to become a major force in the underworld. And what Alan lacked was precisely what the Aldia family possessed. The only thing Loria could think of was political privilege. So, he intends to make use of the power of the nobility. In other words, the prestige accumulated by the Aldia family. Loria knew very well that once the contract was established, there would be no turning back. Therefore, she had to settle her family affairs first. However, when she thought about eventually meeting that man, the corners of Loria's lips, which had long seemed frozen by indifference, curved upward for the first time, forming a smile she did not even notice herself. I hope this gift will satisfy him. After completing the delivery, the butler quietly took his leave. What surprised Alan was that once cold and distant Loria had actually become a countess. He vaguely sensed that the plot was beginning to deviate from its original course. The scene then shifted several months later. Now, only 5 years remained before the beginning of the original story. Young Master No? I should address you as Count now. Although the official ceremony has not yet been held, I can already legally use the title of Count Ferrari. Still, this is completely different from my original plan. At first, I only wanted to live comfortably under the protection of a noble title. Although things had developed unexpectedly, it was not necessarily a bad thing. Soon afterward, Evan respectfully handed him a letter. It is a letter from Aldia, sent from the orphanage. At the same time, Alan casually asked Evan, "Any leads on the person who assassinated Leo?" Could only shake his head helplessly. The Assassin's Guild still hasn't provided any useful information. However, Evan could not help asking, "Your goal isn't simply revenge, is it?" Alan nodded and admitted it directly. This is merely a precaution against future risks. After all, the butterfly effect I've caused has already altered the game's storyline. Then, he opened Aldia's letter. Curious about what the children had written this time, the pages were filled with everyday happenings at the orphanage. Recently, Deus had become obsessed with physical training. Zulong spent her days playing games with her friends. Lena quietly read books and worked on handicrafts. Layton had recently become fascinated with landscape gardening. As Alan read these words, so full of everyday life, an unconscious fatherly smile appeared on his face. Although the 5 great scenes were not his biological children, he had watched them grow up in the orphanage over the past 5 years. Without realizing it, he had developed feelings similar to those of a father. He then asked Evan, "How old is Aldia now?" Although puzzled, Evan still answered, "She should be about 19 years old. The children you brought back then were all around the same age." Hearing this, their obedient image instantly collapsed in Alan's mind. These were future beings, destined to bring destruction to the world. Just thinking about it was enough to make his scalp tingle, not to mention expecting them to feel gratitude. Alan smiled helplessly. It is about time they went out and saw the world for themselves. A few days later, inside the underground chamber of Dongbu Orphanage, this time, the Great Moon has given each of us a different mission. The 5 young people each read Alan's letter. All of them were extremely curious. What kind of path had that lord arranged for them? When every member of Blue Moon received a letter from that lord, the entire organization exploded with excitement, except for Aldia, who already understood the situation. Everyone else looked completely confused, no matter how they looked at it. The letters seemed like ordinary daily conversations. There was nothing that looked like instructions. Faced with their puzzled expressions, Aldia gave the standard explanation. I've said it before. The Lord's instructions are always hidden within the most ordinary words. This disguise is absolutely flawless. He immediately brought out the first secret letter. On it were clearly marked the first elimination target and a complete action plan. It was from that moment onward that blue moon was entrusted to his care, and every one of them had been personally chosen by that lord. At that moment, Deus raised a crucial question. I understand using letters to prevent intelligence leaks, but why not meet in person? Or use a faster magical communicator? Layden immediately nodded in agreement. If security is really the concern, wouldn't letters be even riskier? Faced with their barrage of questions, Yudia's tone suddenly turned cold. He reminded everyone present that their only duty was obedience, seeing the absolute trust in Yudia's eyes. A trust chilling enough to send shivers down one's spine. Deus immediately swallowed his words. The atmosphere instantly dropped below freezing. Fortunately, Zulang smiled and suggested discussing everyone else's assignments. The awkwardness was finally resolved. The group then unfolded their respective letters and quietly read out their destinations. Under the guidance of the Great Moon, Zulang was assigned to a desert colony. Unfortunately, sand was what she hated most. Layden received a ticket to the entertainment capital, Luxus. Lena's destination was the Labyrinth city of Lartania. Meanwhile, Yudia's destination was the holy nation of Rosario. Every letter clearly stated their new identities and new missions. Although Deus could not understand why he had been assigned to become a knight, the letter promised complete support and sufficient resources. In addition, every location contained a note about a mysterious opportunity. The details would only be revealed upon arrival. At the end, Yudia emphasized again that in any public setting, the name Blue Moon must never be mentioned, unless that Lord brought it up first. Thus, the 5 future calamities that were supposed to destroy the world instead set out as followers of Blue Moon on a long journey to carry out Alan's instructions. 3 months later, Alan was deeply immersed in studying the fundamental differences between magic and spells. Book knowledge alone was insufficient. He needed practical experiments to truly understand the principles. At the same time, he once again asked Evan about Leo's case. The answer was exactly the same. The guild still had no progress. Alan immediately realized that the butterfly effect had completely run wild. Not only had he altered the destinies of the 5 calamities, even Loria, who should have died, was alive and well. She had even become a countess and was rapidly expanding her influence. Seeing things spiral out of control, Alan immediately ordered Evan to stop the investigation. It was obvious that a hidden force was operating behind the scenes. In this world, almost nothing could escape the Intelligence Guild's eyes. But once someone touched a forbidden area, they could be erased instantly. The thought alone made Alan's scalp tingle. If he were eliminated early because of unnecessary meddling, all his preparations would become meaningless. As long as he avoided crossing the other side's red lines, they probably would not target him. There was no point in continuing the investigation. Evan agreed to have the guild stop that afternoon. He then reported another matter. Deus had already been knighted in Reborn. This surprised Alan. He had not expected Deus to rise through the ranks so quickly. Another 3 months passed. New reports about Deus arrived. He had actually formed his own knight order. Alan was completely stunned. Hadn't it been less than 2 months since he was knighted? Yet he had already established a knight order of his own. Let Deus take the lead. That would both stabilize the rising stars and intimidate their opponents. In theory, for Deus to acquire a derived skill, he would still need more than 10 years of dedicated training. The current first Reinhardt of Reborn only achieved that feat at the age of 32. Alan knew Reinhardt quite well. In the third main storyline, he always appeared as a temporary ally who came to assist. The man had practiced swordsmanship since the age of 5, eventually becoming the youngest sword saint in history. Even with such heaven-defying talent, it still took him nearly 20 years. But Deus needed only a single year. That was simply beyond what any human should be capable of. At this point, Alan could not help smacking his lips. His face was filled with envy. He subconsciously stroked his chin, his fingertips feeling the cool touch of his teacup. In other words, the higher they rose, the greater the rewards he would receive. Just then, his eyes fell upon a stack of letters on the corner of the desk. Over the past year, on his correspondence list, only Aldia's name remained active. Could it be that he would not even get a sip of the soup in the end, even while living in the Holy Nation? Aldia still insisted on writing back regularly, and every letter was filled with the various bad habits he had developed since childhood. The small group itself remained quite lively, however, although none of them had ever seen his true face. They should at least thank him for that gift. Thinking of this, Alan felt rather miserable, but he quickly shook the thought away. As long as they did not become the 5 great calamities that would destroy the kingdom, he should already be grateful. The scene now shifted to the central district of Reborn. The magnificent building there was the training ground of Deus's knightly order. It was also the residence of the commander of the Eclipse Knights, the youngest swordsmanship master in the kingdom's history. Deus, Martalia. Deus let out a soft sigh. His gaze casually swept across the ornate curtains facing the manor grounds. Brother? When Silverland's voice rang out from the courtyard. The girl in a flowing dress stood on tiptoe, waving vigorously at him. Sunlight danced lightly upon her hair. Deus could not help but smile. Although an entire year had passed, whenever he recalled those events, he still felt somewhat embarrassed. Several years ago, Deus lost everything to the Black Goat. That included his only sister. From that day onward, all that remained within him was uncontrollable rage and hatred. Blue Moon had rescued him from certain death, but that alone was not enough to make him swear loyalty. Blue Moon promised him a chance for revenge, which was why he obeyed Blue Moon's orders, participating in various forms of training and carrying out dangerous missions. Those missions became the foundation of his fight against the forces of darkness, until 1 year ago, when he received the letter that changed everything. At the time, the gift mentioned in the letter did not attract much attention from him. Still, he followed the instructions and went to investigate. However, when he arrived at the designated location, the sight before him left him completely frozen. The sister who was supposed to have died at the hands of the black goat was alive and well, busily working in an Indian. Whenever he remembered how he lost control and tightly embraced her, crying uncontrollably, his ears still burned with embarrassment. Following the address written in the letter, Deus eventually stopped before a humble little house. The moment he pushed open the door, his breathing came to a halt. His sister, who should have died beneath the black goat's blade, stood before him, alive and unharmed. Countless questions flooded his mind. What exactly had his sister experienced all these years? Only after his turbulent emotions settled somewhat did Deus hear from her the dramatic tale of her escape. She confessed that, after falling into the black goat's hands, she had been thrown into a pitch-black iron cage, enduring countless days and nights of suffering. Yet just as she was being led to the execution ground and was about to be put to death, a furious beam of light descended like divine judgment, shattering the executioner's blade with perfect precision. Seizing that fleeting chance of survival, she desperately escaped that living hell. But the outside world proved equally cruel, just as she was captured by slave traders and was about to be placed on an auction block. A mercenary named Evan appeared out of nowhere and rescued her with overwhelming force. The handwritten letter she had sent earlier was a heartfelt expression of gratitude. She confessed to her brother that if Lord Allen had not extended a helping hand in time, she would probably have become nothing more than a wandering soul after hearing his sister's thrilling account. Deus could not help feeling puzzled. How could the Great Blue Moon have known everything in advance? After all, he had never revealed his family's tragedy. Although Aldia had pieced together the black goat's crimes from scattered clues, he should not have known the specific details. How, then, could he know everything so thoroughly? However, that question did not trouble him for long. Words Aldia had once spoken echoed clearly in his mind. That Lord perceives all things in the world. One day, you will understand why I follow him. Deus repeatedly reflected on those words. A declaration he had once dismissed now suddenly enlightened him. Every suspicious detail fit together perfectly. Only then did he realize how foolish he had been. He had failed to understand Aldia's conviction. The truth was that the Great Lord had long since taken control of the entire situation. Looking back on Blue Moon's words, there were clearly hints from someone who knew the truth. He had been guiding that child who intended to face fate alone. His sister Silveri's worried call pulled Deus back from his tangled thoughts. He realized that his plan for revenge against the Black Goat had probably already been seen through by that Great Lord. His reckless act of drawing his sword on his own had been met with such generosity instead. For Deus, who was trapped within a vortex of hatred, his sister's survival was already a miracle, and the fact that the Great Lord had secretly protected her in his name was a blessing more precious than the stars themselves. At that moment, Deus finally achieved complete enlightenment. What Aldia had said was not blind fanaticism, but absolute trust founded upon undeniable facts. Silently, he made a vow deep within his heart. No matter what lay ahead, he had to repay this debt of gratitude. From this day forward, he would follow the will of the moonlight. He would achieve great deeds as a knight in Caliburn and ascend to the pinnacle of knighthood. This was the first step of his plan. No matter how many thorns lined the path ahead, he would move forward without fear. He hoped that one day he could personally express his gratitude and offer a reward worthy of such kindness. Under the moonlight, he would prove his worth. He softly recited the battle cry of the Eclipse Knights. Then he resolutely embarked on a campaign against the barbarians, all for the sake of creating a legendary knight order worthy of the Great Blue Moon. The scene shifted back to Allen. Ever since the royal ball last year, He had become obsessed with studying magical incantations. After countless attempts and failures, he confirmed that these runic patterns truly possess the power to alter the laws of magic using the 4 rune combinations he had discovered while exploring the ruins as a foundation. He began conducting extensive research. The curved rune could strengthen a spell's form, causing its area of effect to grow exponentially. The reverse wave rune could shatter established structures, granting projectiles the ability to perform spatial jumps. The golden light rune seemed capable of summoning heavenly thunder, greatly amplifying the destructive power of lightning-type spells. The final piercing rune defied common sense, allowing magic to ignore defenses and penetrate directly through them. In addition, Alan deciphered 3 iron laws. The same spell could not be chanted twice. Spells with conflicting attributes could not be combined, and the total number of spells could never exceed 5. If any of these core rules were violated, the spell would either fail or suffer a drastic reduction in power. Because the capacity of his magical core was limited, he could perform only 1 complete experiment each day. Furthermore, due to the era in which he lived, all records concerning Babylonian ornaments and runes had long vanished into the river of history. There were no surviving texts for reference. In the end, he could only rely on his own exploration, yet unexpectedly found the process immensely enjoyable. Although he had originally learned magic only for self-protection, he had now become completely immersed in it. The time had come to test the results of 2 months of work, as he began chanting an ancient incantation. Those spells once considered useless were instantly given entirely new meaning. As the incantation condensed within the air, the surging lightning before him suddenly froze in place, as if time itself had been paused. The violent lightning remained locked in the exact form it had taken at the moment of explosion. A second incantation quietly followed. The basketball-sized sphere of lightning began rapidly compressing inward while frozen. Eventually, it transformed into a brilliant point of light no larger than a marble. When the final command for decomposition was issued, the lightning sphere exploded apart. Its energy began rearranging itself, rapidly constructing the outline of an intricate shape. As Alan released the hand seals and recited the final rune, a gigantic tree composed entirely of lightning rose from the ground. Its radiant branches solidified into an eternal pose, as though someone had frozen. The very instant, a lightning bolt struck and turned it into an immortal sculpture. Alan nodded in satisfaction. The order of incantations was indeed critically important. His previous attempt, in which decomposition had been placed first, was nowhere near as impressive as this result. Just then, a shocked cry interrupted him. Turning around, Alan discovered Kalia of the Genonia Count's family, standing nearby, alongside a middle-aged man. Kalia's eyes were wide open, and all traces of noble composure had completely collapsed. Could that have been the legendary origin magic? How could it appear here? The middle-aged man beside him was equally stunned. His expression mirrored Kalia's exactly. To be capable of wielding origin magic meant that the caster had reached at least the level of a 7th-tier mage. Their conversation left Alan completely dumbfounded. Had he somehow become a 7th-tier mage? Not long afterward, the two guests appeared in Count Falati's reception hall. This time, Kalia's visit to the Falati household was driven by 2 separate objectives. First and foremost, Alan clearly possessed a trump card. capable of overturning the current balance of power. Yet he had never chosen to use it. Kalia desperately wanted to understand Alan's true intentions. As for the second reason, he wanted to personally gauge the strength of the mysterious organization that supposedly served under the Count to glimpse even the tip of that unfathomable iceberg. Kalia had carefully prepared a test of his own. The test centered on a fifth-year mage named Bianchi. This man, obsessed with inhumane magical experiments, had long since been expelled from the orthodox magical community. However, his power was beyond question. He was the kind of monster who could crush an entire army with his bare hands. Bianchi had always been arrogant, even when dealing with the Genonia family that funded him. He never lowered himself. Yet at this very moment, the expression on his face was something Kalia had never seen before. It was awe that reached into the depths of his soul. Could what we witnessed just now really have been the legendary origin magic? Just then, a calm voice interrupted Kalia's turbulent thoughts. So, Count Genonia, what brings you here today? Alan's gaze remained indifferent. His expressionless face felt more like a silent warning. Everything they had seen and heard today must remain buried forever. Just treat it as an ordinary demonstration of magic. Bianchi trembled as he spoke first. My deepest apologies, my lord. My eyes deceived me for a moment. It was merely an illusion on my part. Alan nodded in satisfaction. Since the misunderstanding has been cleared up, what is the real purpose of your visit? The sudden question caught Kalia off guard. He hurriedly steadied himself and replied, I was merely passing through. I happened to be handling matters nearby, and thought of your excellency. So I took the liberty of paying a visit. Alan then asked if there was any other reason. Kalia quickly shook his head in denial. After staring at him for a moment, Alan said, Unfortunately, I have many official duties to attend to. I'm afraid I don't have more time to chat. Kalia immediately rose to his feet. Not at all. I was only stopping by anyway. Thank you for taking the time to receive us. I won't trouble you any further. As he prepared to leave, Alan stopped him. If you're looking for someone to talk to, you might consider visiting Duke Aldia. In my opinion, the two of you might get along quite well. Looking at Alan's indifferent smile, Kalia felt his throat go dry. Since that is your recommendation, I shall pay a visit to His Grace. The carriage carrying Miss Genonia slowly departed. Alan's puzzled voice drifted on the wind. Why would that infamous family from the West suddenly come looking for me? Alan himself could not understand Kalia's true intentions. If he had known this would happen, he would never have shown off that spell. It had only attracted unnecessary attention. He just hoped no rumors would spread about him wielding origin magic. This cursed place was full of danger. People who went mad with jealousy at the sight of Sloth practically everywhere. Still, he assumed the other side had understood his final hint. Although he had recommended Duke Aldia, the two great families were notorious rivals. Miss Genonia would surely seek out the Duke instead. As long as she stopped bothering him, everything would be fine. Meanwhile, inside the moving carriage, Kalia asked another question. Was Count Faladi's magic really origin magic? For once, Bianchi did not answer immediately. It was not origin magic. Kalia became even more confused. Then why did you react like that? Faced with Kalia's questioning, Bianchi took a deep breath, trying to calm his shock. Origin magic is the ultimate realm pursued by all mages, like a supreme canvas, upon which one may freely paint. Only great archmages of the 7th tier and above are qualified to paint their own unique laws upon it. Bianchi lowered his voice. But Count Faladi's magic is something else entirely. Strictly speaking, his magic is like tearing a hole straight through the canvas itself. To put it simply, he is distorting the fundamental rules that should have remained eternal and unchanging. He froze, wild, uncontrollable lightning in midair, then personally destroyed the magic formation he had constructed. Yet those fragmented patterns continued functioning on their own. Even more unbelievable, when that man displayed magic that violated common sense, ancient patterns appeared within the depths of his pupils, as though they pointed toward some supreme existence forgotten by history. At that thought, Bianchi abruptly circulated his mana, forcibly cutting off the train of thought. He felt as if his sanity were on the verge of collapse. He had once studied extensively the forbidden knowledge of forgotten ages. He knew all too well how dangerous it would be to continue probing such truths. The only advice he could offer now was simple. Never make an enemy of Count Faladi. Absolutely never stand against him. At this moment, Kalia could only force a bitter smile. The way Alan had looked at him, that emotionless face, those unfathomably deep eyes. There was no way to discern what he was truly thinking. Suddenly, he remembered Alan's words at the time of their farewell. At last, he realized that he had already become nothing more than a chess piece on someone else's board. Time skipped rapidly forward. In the blink of an eye, 5 months had passed. Today marked the 2nd anniversary of the children's departure from the orphanage. By now, Alan was fully capable of managing the affairs of the county with ease. While reviewing documents, he asked Evan whether there was any news about the children. Evan was clearly taken aback. There was still no news from Aldia. However, there had been rumors concerning the Genonia family. It was said that Count Genonia's house had formed an alliance with Duke Aldia's family. The news shocked Alan. The 2 future Dark Overlords of the story had actually joined forces. Evan confirmed it, although it was a secret agreement reached within the underworld, and outsiders had no way of knowing. The alliance itself was real. If my previous words and actions came across as overly direct and cold, I would like to express my sincere apologies once again. The reason is simply that I am not very good at expressing myself. I hope this will not make you think that I am merely making excuses for myself. After finishing the letter, Alan immediately had Evan deliver it. Then his gaze fell upon the desk, where the handwriting on the letter had already become blurred. He could not help worrying about Raiden and Snow Wolf's situation. Ever since Aldia mentioned in a letter that they had safely reached their destination, he had not received any further news from them. Could they have already died in the wilderness? If he discovered the clue hidden within my letter, he should have grown into one of the finest warriors. By comprehending Baba Yaga, he would grasp the true essence of the Golden Tribe. According to the game's settings, this piece of equipment grants a 20% critical hit rate bonus if obtained by the bearer of the Sin of Pride. Not only would he not fall into evil, he would instead become a great hero of the Wolf Clan. That is exactly what the item's description says. Alan had revealed the locations of those hidden treasures to him. Originally, they were meant to serve as emergency funds. He hoped the boy could rely on his own talent to survive independently, so he should be fine, right? Even though that land worshipped strength. With the power of those gauntlets, conquering the entire region should not be difficult. The scene shifted to the southern side of the desert colony, deep within a dark cave. Accompanied by the sound of footsteps, a young woman slowly emerged from the darkness. Her once short hair now reached down to her waist. Though utterly exhausted, she had finally passed all the trials. That complete set of golden claw equipment was a gift bestowed upon her by the Great Blue Moon. She had once believed that the legend of the Golden Tribe's essence was nothing more than a baseless myth. But after experiencing everything firsthand, she realized it was no fairy tale. When she was young, her mother told them that their tribe was a direct descendant of the Golden Tribe, the King of Beasts, and carried on the bloodline of all beast kings. The tribal sacred relic passed down for centuries was a legendary treasure. It granted the tribe strength and authority. Now Snowwolf had finally understood its true meaning and had passed every trial within the inner world. Snowwolf knew very well that he could never have accomplished all this alone. It was all thanks to the Great Blue Moon. Blue Moon was both the benefactor who rescued him from the ice death experiment and the one who granted him the power to avenge his parents against the Black Dragon. He recalled Blue Moon's instructions before they parted. No matter how dull he might be, he understood that the Grey Lord's ambitions were far beyond a mere duelist title. As his thoughts wandered, Snowwolf's eyes naturally fell upon the equipment set. It was the divine artifact, capable of awakening the power of the Golden Tribe's bloodline. The moment he gazed upon the set, he finally understood Blue Moon's true intention: become a famous duelist. Gather the Golden Tribe descendants scattered across the ancient glory, and then kill that damned Black Dragon. The moment Snowwolf stepped out of the cave, a bright full moon hung high in the night sky. The cold light of the blue moon poured down, dyeing the entire desert a pale blue. Everything is for the sake of serving that great lord. He spoke the oath that had become etched into his very soul. 500 years ago, the Golden Tribe, which had united all races as a benevolent ruler, would surely rise again under Blue Moon's guidance. The day after Kalia's visit, Evan gathered some crucial intelligence from the guild. It was all about Snowwolf's recent exploits in the desert colony. That guy was thriving there, and had even earned the impressive title of Golden Flash. The title instantly made Alan freeze. A strong sense of déjà vu washed over him. He was certain he had heard it somewhere before. Evan nodded in agreement. He heard that Snowwolf's income and lifestyle there had become so enviable that even local nobles were jealous. Alan then asked about Raiden's situation. After heading to Laxus, that man had vanished without a trace. Even Alan could not provide a definite answer. Although he had heard some rumors, their authenticity still required verification. For now, they could not be trusted. Soon after, Alan revealed his own plan. He intended to travel to the Magic Tower. The statement left Evan stunned on the spot. "Young Master, has the itinerary already been decided?" Alan gave an affirmative reply. "And this journey might take quite a long time." He estimated it would take a full month. The duration greatly shocked Evan. As far as he knew, it only took about a week to travel from Earl's Ridge to the Green Tower. But Alan was not going to the Green Tower. He was heading to the much more distant Blue Tower. Evan sighed upon hearing this. If that was the destination, then such a lengthy round trip made sense. Still, Evan was filled with confusion. Why travel all the way to the Blue Tower? Wasn't it located between Caliban and the Labyrinth City? After finishing his discussion with Evan, Alan began preparing for the trip. Just thinking about spending 3 weeks bouncing around inside a carriage made him collapse onto the sofa. But in order to solve the crucial problem of his training, he had no choice but to make the journey. The moment he thought of the Blue Tower, a memory suddenly surfaced. The Labyrinth City beside the tower had been the ultimate dungeon farming paradise in the game. The labyrinth contained countless opportunities and treasures, although players flooded into it in overwhelming numbers. Not a single person had ever reached the deepest level. He once came across a forum post claiming that a hacker had managed to break through to floor 150. Yet even deeper layers seemed to exist below. The farther one explored downward, the more outrageous the rewards, experience, and treasures became. Reality was not much different from the game's settings, but now that he thought about it, perhaps the gift he had given Renee was too modest compared with the generous gifts received by the other 5 Renee had received only an appraisal tool. If he ever felt it was not enough, he could always provide additional support later. Meanwhile, in the Labyrinth City of Lartania, a city free from the laws of any kingdom, it stood as a haven exclusively for adventurers and mercenaries. Passing through the bustling shopping district, one could find, in a secluded southern corner, an appraisal shop known as Although its location was unremarkable, customers still arrived in an endless stream every day. Most of them were formidable figures from the deepest parts of the labyrinth, or adventurers who risked their lives for a living. There were even foreign nobles among them, as well as the Lord of Latania himself. At this moment, a masked young woman was helping the Lord appraise an item he had brought. It was a magical device capable of producing flames, its surface engraved with ancient runes. The Lord took the item back from the masked girl, letting out a hearty laugh. Items bearing rune inscriptions had greatly enhanced effects. Take this item, for example, with only a tiny amount of mana. It could provide illumination for a very long time. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the Lord left in satisfaction. Once he had gone, the young woman slowly removed her mask. Underneath was Renee, who let out a quiet sigh of relief. Renee was not only capable of appraising ancient relics brought by nobles, but could also add enhancement inscriptions to special items. However, this talent was not innate. His true ability was to use the ancient library within him to perceive the essence of all things, or identify special objects capable of bearing mysterious inscriptions. As for the power to apply those inscriptions, that was a gift bestowed by the Great Blue Moon. When Renee pushed open the side door of the office, a golden eyeball floating in midair suddenly rotated its pupil, which shimmered with blue light. A faint mechanical sound echoed from it. The progress bar above the eyeball displayed the number 247. Renee stared at the floating interface. At first, like the other sim bearers, he could never understand why the Great Moon had sent him to the Labyrinth City and given him the role of an appraiser. Although he already knew that he was a forgotten survivor from the era of the Outer Gods, and vaguely sensed that everything had been arranged to oppose the Dark Ones, he still could not see the connection between the tasks. After all, possessing the ancient library, he understood better than anyone just how terrifying the Dark Ones truly were. But what did slaying darkness have to do with appraising relics? Only when he completely understood the gift bestowed by the Great Blue Moon did everything suddenly become clear. The Wanderer's Eye. It could quickly identify items below a certain mana threshold. It was useful as a support tool, but for Renee, who possessed the ancient library, its true nature became obvious at a glance. This eyeball was far from ordinary. as he gradually removed its seals. He discovered things not even recorded in his library. The originally spherical eyeball revealed its true form and awakened entirely new abilities. That ability was the art of inscription. Yet, the progress bar above the eye also made him realize that this artifact required constant nourishment. As René absorbed the inscription essence obtained from his latest appraisal, the progress bar rose from 247 to 248. At first, René had no idea how to level it up. Only after numerous experiments did he finally understand that the eye reacted only to special patterns found within high-grade relics. Otherwise, the accumulated power would dissipate, correctly identifying every relic and selecting high-grade offerings suitable as inscription vessels was something only he, as the bearer of the ancient library, could accomplish. Moreover, in this place, he could continuously gather resources and protection for the future battle against the Black Wolves. Everything is progressing according to the will of the Great Moon. As he gently stroked the floating wanderer's eye, a faint, unreadable glimmer flashed across René's eyes. 3 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. Alan arrived at the Blue Tower as scheduled. However, he did not meet the person he had expected. The Tower Master, Penya Crecia, was a 6th-year mage, yet the moment he saw Alan and Evan, his face was filled with undisguised impatience. His attitude left Alan puzzled, although he had not yet become the Tower Lord. At the beginning of the game, it would not be long before he advanced to the 7th tier and became a universally acknowledged genius in this fantasy world. The Magic Towers possessed not only immense strategic power, but also monopolized certain rare resources. Therefore, their status rivaled that of the nobility. Hello, I am Alan Farati. As previously stated in my message, I came here to discuss the stone gate. I can eliminate it. The moment Penya heard Alan's words, he stopped all movement. A stone gate was a rift formed in areas where magic was used excessively. It connected to an unknown subspace, causing all kinds of anomalies and inflicting severe corruption upon the human body. Penya's sharp gaze turned toward Alan. Secretly, he activated an appraisal spell. Moments later, he openly displayed disappointment. He waved his hand dismissively. If you're finished, then please leave. I haven't heard your answer yet. Alan's response only made Penya more irritated. You want to use the stone gate for your own gain and seize whatever treasures lie within, don't you? How many people do you think have come to me with that exact motive? Alan spoke again. Just take me to the stone gate, and I'll let you witness it with your own eyes. Penya sneered. You people who climbed the rank of Count by stepping over corpses. Your facade is about to crumble. I understand desperation, but don't come causing trouble here. And Alan also realized that this woman, who appeared detached from worldly affairs, was actually well informed about all kinds of secrets within noble circles. Alan quietly reminded himself that, with her level of magical power, she could probably split a person in half with ease. Yet Alan showed no intention of backing down. If I fail to eliminate the stone gate, I am willing to hand over all of my family's assets, and I can even swear a magical oath. It will only take a little of your time. That sounds like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? Hearing this, Penya fell silent for a moment. Later, while on the way to the stone gate, Penya reminded Alan once again, if you fail to close the stone gate, all of the Farati family's property will belong to the Blue Tower. Alan responded without hesitation. That will never happen. Watching the man's determined back as he pushed the door open, Penya suddenly recalled the rumor surrounding this young count. Was he the product of the dark power struggles within the Count's family? Or merely someone who had profited from others' efforts, compared to the former? Penya was more inclined to believe the latter. Penya could tell that Alan possessed only second-tier magical ability. Although his perception was fairly good, his monocore capacity was too small. His future achievements would likely stop there. Alan soon arrived at the location of the stone gate. The stone gate was also a troublesome problem for the Blue Tower. To this day, no one had successfully closed it. Therefore, Pina simply could not believe that this man before her, possessing only second-tier strength, could accomplish it. If you can't do anything, then leave immediately. When she saw Alan begin making hand gestures, Pina was startled. Ancient magical texts recorded it, referring to it as primordial magic. But in her view, someone who had never properly studied formal magic and merely copied primitive gestures from ancient books had no chance of closing the stone gate. The instant Alan softly began chanting the incantation, the anger on Pinia's lips froze completely. It was as though the entire world had been paused. Pena barely managed to activate the Eye of Truth through sheer willpower when her gaze swept above Alan. She saw a bizarre pattern emerge in the air. As an eye resembling a black hole slowly opened, it revealed a pupil surrounded by a crimson stellar halo. Like a giant deity, he coldly gazed down upon everything below. Alan completed his origin magic spell. Still shaken, Pena forcibly pushed her mana forward and activated her magic eye, the standard ability of a 6th-tier mage, said to reveal the truth of all things. But this time, the image returned by the magic eye left Pena utterly bewildered. She could see it clearly, yet she could not comprehend the true nature of what she was seeing. Just as a crucial piece of information was about to be understood, at that very moment, Pena's survival instincts sounded their most urgent warning. The mana surging through her body was forcibly cut off, crushing that nearly formed realization before it could fully take shape. At that moment, the only thing she understood was that the existence behind Alan was a realm she could not even dare contemplate. If she spoke even a single wrong word, she had no doubt that she would be erased from this world instantly. Then, the phantom in the sky descended before her. A single finger silently pressed against her trembling lips. The warning required no words. Pena blinked frantically in terror when those crimson, demonic eyes opened and closed one final time. The enormous magic circle enveloping the area shattered completely. At last, it was over. Pena nearly jumped when she saw Alan move. In reality, closing this broken gate was incredibly easy for Alan. All it required were the proper tools and a specific technique. However, considering that he would need Pena's rewards in the future, Alan casually added a grand-looking magical display, specifically to impress Pena. But now, Pena's condition made him uneasy. Where had all her arrogance suddenly gone? Could she really have seen through my secret? Just as he was wondering whether he should explain everything, Pena unexpectedly spoke first. I swear upon my mana, I will absolutely keep this secret. Even if I die, I won't reveal a single word. I may seem blunt and reckless normally, but I'm actually very good at keeping secrets. Alan stared blankly at the young lady before him, who was suddenly speaking while trembling from head to toe. What on earth was going on? The scene shifted. Alan returned to the main hall. Now that he had obtained what he wanted, he didn't want to stay there for even another second. However, just as he turned to leave, Pena called out to him once more. This is a top-tier mana recovery potion that I personally brewed. Please accept it. Alan took the bottle, which shimmered with a deep blue glow. Its value was enough to buy a luxurious mansion in the city center. On her face, she forced an extremely awkward, ingratiating smile. Are you satisfied? Alan simply could not understand why Pena had suddenly offered such a valuable gift. She herself couldn't clearly explain the reason either. Not only did she repeatedly promise to keep silent, She even wanted to swear a magical oath on the spot. It's just a method for closing a gate. Does it really require such a serious reaction? Could this be another misunderstanding? Just like with Mrs. Genonia last time. Just as Alan was about to clarify everything, the surrounding mana suddenly erupted. A massive contract magic circle flared to life beneath their feet. Several chains of light linked him and Pena together. It was an unbreakable magical oath. Seeing Pena's expression as though she were ready to die for her conviction, Alan knew that no matter what he said now, she wouldn't listen. In the end, I left Lantama directly with 5 precious potions and the rewards from the mission. Sitting in the carriage, Evan couldn't help but examine the bracelet curiously. This thing doesn't look impressive at all. It looks like a cheap trinket bought from a roadside stall. Does it really work? Hearing that, Alan gave him a confident nod. It may be insignificant to high-ranking mages, but to me, it's a lifesaver. The solitary one's bracelet, the gemstone on it, can automatically absorb and store ambient mana from the surroundings, although its capacity can't compare to legendary artifacts, compared with my pitiful magic core. It's already far superior. Whenever he thought about his disappointing mana reserves, Alan felt a headache coming on. He actually had to rely on external items to replenish his mana bar. Still, my goal has always been to explore magic and protect myself, not to compete with others for strength. For now, there should be enough. Alan comforted himself with that thought. After ending his train of thought, he turned his gaze out the window. Why had Pena's attitude changed so drastically? What exactly had she misunderstood? I repeatedly emphasized that I was merely an ordinary second-tier mage. It's truly impossible to understand. Could it be the same misunderstanding that happened with Kalia? But it wasn't a big problem. After all, he probably would never cross paths with that young lady again. Alan relaxed and leaned back in the carriage, enjoying the warmth of a spring afternoon. Meanwhile, in the conference hall of Duke Aldia's estate, 2 women sat across from one another. They greeted each other with the familiarity of old acquaintances. Ordinarily, such a scene would be inappropriate. After all, Loria was already an officially invested duchess, while Kalia was merely a count's daughter. But because they both served the same person, those worldly differences in status seemed insignificant. Ever since Kalia received Alan's hint, she had taken the initiative to contact Loria. Only after this meeting and their discussion did they confirm that they were both echoes of Count Ferrati, although they did not know Alan's exact intentions. He had clearly instructed them to form an alliance, faced with overwhelming power and a common objective. The relationship between Genonia and Aldia rapidly grew closer. You came here unexpectedly today. Is there something important? The official reading gathering isn't until next week. Faced with Loria's question, Kalia carefully took a sealed letter from her clothing. The Count wrote this letter specifically for me, using my previous visit as an excuse. Loria accepted the letter and read it carefully. If one were unfamiliar with Count Ferrati's style, the letter would seem like nothing more than an ordinary greeting and apology, apart from a few pleasantries. It mostly contained noble gossip. Kalia could not accurately grasp its hidden meaning, which was why she had come to consult Loria. This was the fastest way to uncover the Count's true intentions. Some nobles had complained to me before. The letter states it plainly. There are very few nobles I get along with. Baron Kenya is a staunch supporter of the noble faction, while Count Malentino is a central figure of the royalist faction. Viscount Veranda also belongs to the royalists. As for Duke Paldevane, he is likewise a pillar of the noble faction. In simple terms, whether noble faction or royalist faction, the Count disliked all of them. The dangerous idea of eliminating them all flashed through both women's minds simultaneously, but such a notion was far too shocking. Thus, another, more feasible plan naturally emerged. That was to overthrow the existing aristocratic system and establish an entirely new order. As those words fell, the room sank into brief silence. Loria raised her head and let out a soft sigh. Until now, she had never understood why Alan had spared her life. But if Alan's ambition truly involved something this monumental, then everything suddenly made sense. With the Western Jin overlord joining their cause, the scales of victory had already begun to tilt in their favor. The two women immediately began planning their next move. A few days later, when the Lord of Lanta returned, he learned from Pena that the sex affairs had been suspended. He was extremely curious about what method Count Ferrati had used, but Pena could only make up vague explanations. Thus, a blueprint created entirely from imagination began to spiral out of control and move forward on its own. Meanwhile, as the sun set and temperatures dropped sharply in the forest, Alan was contentedly eating a roasted sweet potato. Right now, all he wanted was to return to the Count's estate as soon as possible, because Yudia's reply should be arriving around this time. The scene shifts to Rosario of the Holy Kingdom. Before the statue of goddess Genonia stood a white-haired nun. Her snow-white hair made even the pure white statue seem dull by comparison. The Lord of Lanta Salam had barely stepped through Lanta's gates when a strange feeling washed over him. After all, the disciple who always argued with him looked as if her soul had been drained away. Pena was sitting quietly at the table, reading a book. The sight completely stunned Salam. What kind of strange day was this? The genius girl had actually changed her temperament. You should know, Pena had always been the center of attention since childhood. Her pride was practically high enough to reach the clouds. Logically speaking, the newly arrived Count Ferrati should have been intimidated by her long ago. Although Pena was usually as arrogant as a peacock, Salam had never intended to correct that trait, because Pena's current state was precisely what made everything seem so strange. Salam scratched his head in confusion. Could it be that I was away in the north for too long? And the assignments I left you were simply too difficult. Pena looked at her master with a pitiful expression. She then recounted everything that had happened during Count Ferrati's visit. You're saying that Count Ferrati personally closed that gate? Pena nodded vigorously. Although the Count closed the passage, he bound us with a magical oath. We are unable to reveal the specific details. Pena nodded weakly once again. Everything I can say has already been told, while the secrets I cannot reveal have been completely sealed by magic. Looking at her unprecedentedly dispirited appearance, Salam suddenly burst into laughter. If even a genius like Pena cannot comprehend such magic, then it's probably the legendary origin magic. As for the rumors surrounding Ferrati, Salam had heard them long ago. People all said that he was a ruthless man who rose to power by eliminating his brothers. After realizing this, a playful smile appeared on Salam's lips toward that Count from the remote frontier. He developed an unprecedented level of interest. Soon, another month passed. Ever since Alan returned from land, with the support of the Solitary One's bracelet, he had been able to cast 3 to 4 spells steadily every day. Today, however, he had discovered a new rule. Identical spells could not stack their effects, but if he used spells with similar structures, their power could increase almost as if they were stacked. Alan quickly recorded this crucial discovery in his notebook to achieve spell stacking. Each spell seemed to require a specific prerequisite incantation. He guessed that complex combinations and permutations were involved. Just then, Evan's voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. "My Lord Count, the power of your magic is becoming increasingly outrageous." Alan let out a soft sigh and turned around. A second-tier spell should never possess this level of destructive power. Compared to a few months ago, it's like an entirely different thing. Following their line of sight, a gigantic crater could be seen on the ground ahead. The spell Alan had just cast was merely a second-tier gravity spell. Even at full power, it should not have been capable of crushing solid bedrock. Yet, he could clearly sense that his mana had undergone a qualitative change. Could this really be just his imagination? If he had to find a reason for the sudden surge in power, the answer certainly wasn't his proficiency or the spell itself. An increase in magical proficiency usually meant more precise control, while incantations functioned more like switches that altered the nature of magic. Over the past few months, Alan had obsessively studied the incantation sequences of gravity magic. Recently, he had even cross-tested several groups of similar spells. In the end, he found the most effective arrangement. The power of the spell steadily increased as a result. Alan scratched his head in confusion. There was no reason for its power to suddenly leap forward. Perhaps he was simply in exceptionally good condition today. Realizing he couldn't find a definite answer, Alan naturally changed the subject. "A letter has arrived from you." Alan took the opportunity to end his magical research. He turned and headed toward his office. After all, he had already used up all 3 casting opportunities for the day. He knew very well that magic did not grow stronger without reason. Could it be compensation gained after enduring a curse? Curses were originally a unique ritual of the East, where power was obtained through sacrifice of oneself or others. Those who bore a curse would lose something as the price. However, Alan had not recently come into contact with that faction. Could it be the power of faith at work? He quickly rejected the idea. Alan was merely a fallen count from a remote kingdom. That explanation simply did not hold up. In the end, he concluded that the weather was simply exceptionally clear today. Meanwhile, in Rosario of the Holy Kingdom, the goddess worshipped there was symbolized by the moon. Genonia, within the tranquil halls of the monastery, a nun was silently praying before the goddess's statue. Soon after, a knight clad in white armor quietly approached from behind. "Good evening, sister." The nun replied with a gentle smile. "May the goddess's radiance forever shine upon you." "Sir Locke, has everything gone smoothly?" Ordinarily, an unsanctioned nun without holy office should rank below a knight in status. Yet between Locke and the nun, there was no distinction of rank whatsoever. "Thanks to your blessing, I rescued 8 children in an eastern village this time. A total of 25 lives were saved. This is all the goddess's grace, and it is also thanks to your daily guidance, sister." Yudia lowered her head and returned the knight's courtesy. "You are too modest. It was clearly your sword that cut down the disaster." Yet Locke's expression remained resolute. The body beneath his armor tensed slightly. "It is true that I was the one who saved them, but who guided me so I would not lose my way in the darkness? It was you, sister." For a full 20 years, Locke had never sensed even the slightest trace of divine power. He could never forget that evening when despair nearly consumed him. Just as his last hope was about to be extinguished, a nun appeared before him like moonlight itself. "If you desire power so desperately, why not try placing your faith in the moon itself?" At first, Locke simply could not understand what difference there was between worshipping the moon goddess Genonia and worshipping the moon directly, but having no other options left, he placed all his faith in the bright moon. He prayed like that day and night. After 20 years without an answer, one night Locke finally felt divine power for the very first time. At the same time, he earned the qualification to become a holy knight. Yet there was no joy in Locke's heart. Instead, he was filled with fear, a deep fear that he might have stepped onto, a path from which there was no return. Instead, he had turned his faith toward the moon itself. However, the holy light produced by his divine power was no different from before. Those sacred artifacts recognized by the gods were shining purely in his hands at this very moment, silently proving the legitimacy of this power. When he finally gathered the courage to ask the nun why she had told him to believe in the moon, Aldia gave him her answer. Although faith itself is intangible, belief requires a long time to build, drawing strength from something that tangibly exists is ultimately much easier, because the moon is always hanging above our heads. After hearing those words, the dark clouds in Locke's heart instantly dispersed. After all, goddess Genonia herself was the embodiment of the moon for his former self, full of doubt and suspicion, and for the nun who had guided him toward divine light. Locke felt endless gratitude welling up within him. Meanwhile, Aldia spoke softly. If you wish to express your gratitude, would you pray together with me? Hearing this, Locke solemnly placed his hand over his chest. It would be my honor. Seeing Locke nod in agreement, a faint smile appeared on Aldia's lips. Now is the time for prayer. Everyone has already gathered. She pushed open the church's heavy wooden doors. Inside sat a hall full of worshippers, praying in silence. Everyone was immersed in devout meditation. Without making the slightest sound, Aldia walked through the crowd and stepped onto the podium. Then let us begin tonight's sermon. A faint glow shimmered within her crimson eyes. Behind her, the stained glass windows reflected a clear moonlit hue. She softly recited the prayer, "Praise be to the great blue moon." Alan had just finished reading the letter sent by Aldia. He gently placed the letter on the desk and fell into brief contemplation. The words in the letter were still filled with everyday warmth and trivial details. It seemed that the lives of the 5 great scenes were peaceful and stable. That alone was tremendously good news. Yet within Alan's chest, he could not help but let out a sigh. Because aside from Aldia's envelope, there was not a single word from the other children. That silent contrast filled his heart with loneliness. Still, he quickly found a reason for his disappointment. After all, he had never personally stepped into that orphanage. His connection with those 5 children had begun through secret guidance, compared to their brilliant new lives. Alan was perhaps nothing more than a mysterious benefactor who had provided crucial help before quietly fading away. His original goal had already been achieved beyond expectation. He had successfully guided the 5 great scenes away from the fate of destroying the world. Such an accomplishment was enough to illuminate any transmigrator's life. He should neither expect nor desire any greater emotional return. Yet the human heart is made of flesh, not a machine of pure logic. That subtle sense of disappointment quietly seeped into his heart like mist. However, when his gaze returned to Aldia's neat handwriting, a warm current instantly washed away all of those lingering emotions. The letters from his eldest daughter, delivered punctually every month, had never once been delayed. They had become a constant and unchanging point of reference throughout his life in this world. He had raised 5 children, yet 4 of them had vanished without a trace. Only the eldest daughter continued to remember and repay the kindness of being raised. The sharp contrast filled Alan with immense comfort. As expected, the most thoughtful and dependable one was always Aldia, just as he was about to immerse himself in his daughter-like warmth. Suddenly, heaven rushed into the room like a gale. The sudden commotion almost made Alan jump out of his chair. It turned out that Alan had received explosive intelligence from the Intelligence Guild. The reports were all about the recent activities of those children. Some of their information no longer required special investigation because their deeds had already spread across the land like wildfire. Especially the legendary achievements of Deus and Snowwolf. The first report concerned Snowwolf's latest opportunity and progress. He was currently participating in the 100 Victories trial, required to challenge the legendary existence Baba Yaga. In one breathtaking run, he had secured an astonishing 32 consecutive victories. This news caused Alan's eyes to widen in shock. He quickly asked, "What is the highest winning streak ever recorded?" At the Colonia Arena, Evan immediately replied with a number worthy of awe. The current record holder was the legendary Lion King. He had created the myth of 41 consecutive victories. The moment Alan heard that name, it instantly unlocked his long-sealed memories. Wasn't that the Lion King companion who had joined the party midway through the game? A character so absurdly powerful that he felt like an official cheat code. Colonia, that massive arena was filled with all kinds of people. On the surface, it seemed full of chaos and violence. In reality, countless unfathomably powerful experts lurked beneath. The Western Kingdom's strength depended heavily on top-tier fighters, precisely because it possessed such terrifying reserves of civilian combat power. The neighboring kingdoms dare not provoke it in the slightest. They had long since been transformed, becoming combat monsters beyond the understanding of ordinary people. Even though Evan did not elaborate or exaggerate the details, Alan understood very well the terrifying significance represented by the 8 chieftains. He had personally experienced their absurd strength back in the game. What chilled Alan even more was the ultimate existence known as Earth, the vessel through which a god could descend. Once that monster fully awakened and obtained a complete divine status, its power would be enough to stand against the 5 captains who protected the world. At that moment, Alan could not help but feel fortunate. Thankfully, he would never have to face such a terrifying being that existed beyond ordinary standards. After all, Erdus would only appear when the 5 great scenes descended. Now that Deus had managed to slay one of the dreaded chieftains, his reputation was rapidly approaching that of the kingdom's greatest swordsman, Reinhardt. Hearing this, Alan even found himself wondering whether he should personally visit and see this rising hero for himself. Afterward, Alan asked about Jin, who was training in the Labyrinth city. According to reports, the boy had already mastered the technique of black reinforcement engraving, but the person Alan was most concerned about and most anxious to hear about was still Shidan. Could it be that the boy had truly embarked upon that path and become a pirate king? Evan's next words struck like a thunderbolt. Do you know about the famous 7 archipelagos off the coast of Raxus? In those waters, 7 immensely powerful pirate overlords hold sway, and Shidan has already succeeded in conquering the largest of them, the first archipelago. He has become the unquestioned ruler and captain of that entire sea region. The impact of this news was so overwhelming that Alan's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed directly onto the floor. For some reason, this bizarre development felt strangely familiar. It reminded him of an old joke that had once gone viral online. A poor child sponsored by a charity for 8 years, eventually growing up to become a pirate leader. off the coast of Somalia, when Alan had sent Shadan to Raxus back then. This was definitely not the fantastical outcome he had envisioned. As a descendant of the sea god race with exceptional perception, Shadan should have enjoyed an overwhelming advantage in the water. The perfect career path Alan had designed for him was that of a treasure hunter, specializing recovering rare ancient relics hidden within the endless depths of the Raxus Sea. To support that future, Alan had even prepared a legendary gift that enhanced perception as a farewell present. Yet reality had delivered a completely unexpected blow. Not only had the boy become a pirate, he had directly risen to the top and become the strongest overlord of the Western Seas while still reeling from the shock. A crucial question suddenly flashed through Alan's mind. Just how has Shadan managed to defeat the captain of the first archipelago, a monster of that caliber? Those pirate lords, within their own territories, were practically synonymous with invincibility. But Alan quickly arrived at a reasonable explanation. Most likely, Shadan had recovered some heaven-defying ancient artifact from an underwater ruin. After all, Alan himself had once spent 3 sleepless days grinding through a treasure hunting minigame just to collect certain relics from that sea region. So if Shadan had obtained god-tier equipment, used it to overwhelm his opponents, and seize the captain's position, that would be entirely possible within the logic of this world. Alan raised a weary hand and gently rubbed the corner of his eyes. He should have realized long ago that events rarely unfold exactly as one hopes. At this point, he felt more like an aging father constantly worrying about his children's futures.